Howdy hey, hello there! Today I am documenting finishing a very sentimental project. As you can see from the thumbnail, this is a quilt that my granny taught me how to quilt on, so I am finishing this up since she can't. It looks like all that's left to do is add the binding to this quilt, which I helped quilt by hand, which I'm really proud to say that I have this quilt. My mom is letting me keep this one, even though it's kind of hers, but thanks, Mom. It looks like it's about a twin size, so I'm just going to go ahead and measure the outside edges of it so I know how much binding to cut. And I've decided, since I have a couple of options for binding, this is the main part of the quilt, and then there's cross stitches in the middle, and then this is the backing. I'm going to do the binding the same as the backing because I think that would look really cute to bring the binding to the front of the quilt. So here's what the front looks like. And then, like I said, I think it's about a twin size quilt, but I'll measure and find out for sure. Each of these white squares was hand cross stitched by my granny. So yeah, you can see where I get my patience for handwork from. Definitely from her. This is just so bizarre. I wonder which of the corners was the one I did. I could probably compare them and find out. Might be this one because it looks very uneven. But I was 11 when I first learned how to hand quilt. And it was just great. That's a really fond memory I have of my granny, and I'm so glad that we have a picture of it. Oh, so I just need to do the binding and then hand stitch the back of the binding and then trim the edges of the quilt after I add the binding and then flip it and hand stitch it. I think I said that. Oh well. So yeah, I'm just going to measure the outside of the quilt, and then I'll show how I cut the binding and then sew it all together. Ta-da! And it'll be done. After looking closer at this, I think this is probably more of a full or even a queen size, but again, we'll find out once I measure it and I can find that out from the internet. Yay! So for measuring, I just take a measuring tape and then measure the short side and the long side and then double it, and then that's how much I need for the binding. Pretty easy. And I always round up. So this is at 65.25, so I'm just going to say it's 65.5. I'm going to write that down. Okay, so then I'll just double those two numbers and then add those all together, and then that's how much binding length that I need. I think I'll probably do a 2.5 or maybe 3-inch binding width. So we'll go cut that now. In order to figure out how much of this I need to cut, I need to see how wide it is. So I'm just going to measure from selvage to selvage, and then I'll iron it. Possibly, yeah, I think I'll go ahead and iron it. And then cut it into 2.5-inch strips. So this one is probably 42 wide, maybe 43. Okay, so we'll go ahead and round down to 42. I'll add these, multiply it by 2, divide it by 42. And that's how many strips I'll need. And always round up. Cool, cool. So iron that, calculate this, cut that. But probably not in that order. Whatever. There are my 8 strips. I needed 7.8 strips, so I just went ahead and cut 8. So now I'll just stitch all of those together, and then iron them, and then roll them, and sew them onto the quilt. I love this thing! have all of my binding ironed under so that it's easier as I go along and once I sew it by hand next. So now I'm just going to sew it onto the quilt with my walking foot. So I'm just going to change my foot on the machine. And I don't want to start at a corner because the mitered corners are easier to do when you are farther away from them. And it's also a lot easier if you leave a lot of a tail on the binding so that you can match it up later. And away we go! I checked the length of my binding length, checked the length of the length, and it turns out that I forgot to add in seam allowance. So I ended up having to cut up another strip, but look how close this was to being just exactly how much I needed. So that'll stop probably there-ish. And then this piece, this is comical. It's not almost comical, it is comical. This piece stops here. So I was off by a matter of inches. Yeah, like inch and a quarter. So I got a whole new strip, but that's not a big deal because now I have plenty of extra so that I can join the two. So I'm just going to pin these together and then open out the fold that I ironed over, and then I'll stitch all the rest of this down and then I'll join these two. Yippee! I finished the machine stitching of the binding. Now I'm just going to cut the excess away and then I can flip it and pin it and stitch it by hand. All trimmed and ready to pin. This is something that I like to do before I sit down to sew the binding by hand because it's easier to get it straight and it's easier to wrap it around when it's flat and when I'm standing. That may not be the same for you, but that's just what I like to do. For the hand sewing part of the binding, I like to use quilting thread. Normally I use Aurifil, which is great and I love, and hey, hi Aurifil, love you. This is just coats cotton. It works really well, it's really strong, and then that way I know that it's not going to cause an issue later on. So I'm just going to stitch away and finish off this project that my granny taught me how to quilt on. Thank you guys so much for joining me today and for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Bye!